Hello, and welcome back, my spooky little morsels, to the condemned asylum nestled amongst the dark and twisty pines, the Dead Hours. I am the inmate who runs said asylum, and the future ghost with the most, Vivian Noir. Because it's me, and you love me. Yay. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Hello to everyone who is in the audience, all of my lovely, spooky little death muffins. There we go. I had to switch over to the chat so I can see it better. Thank you. And I will just punch him. I think that's fair. I think that is that's fair. Fair point. Beyond questions, just pop. I was making coffee. I hope you all have some delicious beverages that you are going to be perusing and drinking and enjoying while we go for round 2 of Ted Bundy Lady Killer. So to recap a little bit, we kind of backtrack a second. So content warning for everybody before we get into things, before we get into the nitty-gritty and the details. I do have to warn everybody that we are about to cover some actual true crime statistics, actual crime scene stuff. It is very disturbing. It is very dark material. It is not for the faint of heart, nor is it necessarily for sensitive or younger audiences. So please bear that in mind. You have been warned, as the saying goes. Hello to everybody in the chat. Hello, my lovelies. So last week, we left off with a troubling fact, did we not? Take that back. 2 troubling facts, actually. 1, Ted Bundy had kidnapped, raped, and murdered at least 18 women to date across Washington, Oregon, Colorado, and Utah before his apprehension and arrest. 2, Ted Bundy had escaped jail, and no one knew where he was, or that he was even gone. So we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. So we're going to go backtrack, and we're going to recap just a little bit and hear from Ted himself, shall we?
Not an animal, I'm not crazy, I'm an honest good personality. Yeah, just a normal individual.
Normal individual. Sure, Ted. So we may be getting ahead of ourselves because need I mention the fact that this man escaped twice from jail? Twice. So how did he get away successfully? Let's revisit the initial escape from the one in Aspen, Colorado. So he did have a modicum of freedom while he was on trial in Aspen because he was assisting in his own defense. He was representing himself, and as such, any attorneys had access to the legal library on the 2nd floor of the courthouse. So their judge did not require him to wear the shackles and leg irons that are customary for inmates because, it makes it a little hard to get around the library, I suppose. So he was free to move between his cell and the law library in order to do research for himself and his case. Turns out what he was actually researching was, how best to jump out of a 2-story window. But, nobody knew that at the time. He had seen the opportunity for escape many times and had given it brief thought. On June 7th, 1977, he put those plans into base action. So he was locked in the law library alone at the Pitkin County Courthouse by sheriff's deputies. The deputy that normally watched Bundy while he was in the library stepped outside of the library and locked the door behind him in order to have a cigarette. Bundy then took that opportunity to go to the window, and as he had been practicing jumping off of his the top bunk in his cell in order to simulate a fall and how to best brace himself for a fall, he opened the window on the second story and he jumped out. Why there were no bars on these windows in a courthouse, not really sure, but a little, closing the door after the horse has already gotten out, I suppose. So he jumped. He sprained his ankle, but didn't do any more damage than that. And he fled into the mountains. He fled barefoot, in fact. I think he just fled and just ran and was gone for about 6 days. He disappeared just into the wilderness. He claims it was very unpleasant, and he was running around barefoot. His feet were sore and calloused. He got caught in the rain at one point and started to get symptoms of exposure because he had found himself like a little hunting shack up in the mountains that he had sheltered in briefly, but the weather was not great. And of course, he's still, somewhat, he is running around in the wilderness, not prepared for this. This is in Colorado too, by the way. It's in June, but at the same time, it's like, I'm sure the nights are still chilly. So he was not in the best way. Yeah. He's not like one of those Man versus Wild kind of guys, was not made for the wilderness lifestyle, y'all, was not made for the savagery of the wilds. And he stole a car. He made it to a road, stole a car, but he was driving back into town. So of course, everybody knows by now he has escaped, and they've got, APB, the cops out looking for him. And, they're doing checkpoints with vehicles, and they're just asking everybody, maybe he hid in somebody's trunk. Maybe he was hiding with someone, and they pulled him over, immediately recognized him in said car, and he was returned after 6 days of freedom. So he was moved to the Garfield County Jail in Colorado Springs in an effort to keep him in one place. But this effort would prove, futile. Inside of his cell at the Garfield County Jail, there was a grate in the ceiling and a light that had not been properly secured. The light was loose in this fixture. It had been due to be welded and repaired, but had not been in the time Bundy occupied the cell. No doubt he immediately noticed these weaknesses. This was a man that jumped off his bunk, you guys, to prepare for a fall. So I'm pretty sure he noticed that something was a little off with this light fixture. And he strategically then, as part of this new plan, began dropping a lot of weight. Quote, "When I visited him in Glenwood, I noticed that he had lost a lot of weight," unquote, said John Henry Brown, Bundy's former defense attorney. "I'd say he lost 20 or 25 pounds. I would think this would have come to the attention of the jailers, perhaps. Why is he doing this?" Nobody really seemed to know. They just, I think, maybe thought it was part of maybe a hunger strike, maybe just being a difficult prisoner, refusing to eat. That's not the first time that's ever happened. That's not unusual for inmates to do, especially if they're protesting being incarcerated, if they're protesting their accommodations, they don't like their cell. Sometimes they'll do whatever they can do to rebel, and that one of those things is not eating. So they probably didn't really think anything of it, but that wasn't the reason. He also wasn't doing keto. He wasn't just trying to get fit with that tiny waist and that big bank. No, he was not trying to do that. The answer would come on December 30th, 1977. So the jail staff was already limited because of the upcoming New Year's holiday. and many of them had New Year's off already. So the jail was already running on a skeleton crew, and there was limited patrols. Bundy carved an opening in the ceiling of his cell slightly wider than the fixture of the light in the grate, so he could fit through. Being a significant amount of pounds lighter, no doubt assisted in the tight squeeze. It was not a very large opening. It was like 24 inches or something like that to fit in. So you can imagine he must have been either measuring the space and then measuring himself somehow to figure out that, how I can actually get my way up through there. So, and exactly how much weight he would have to lose to not only A, fit through the escape tunnel, and B, still have the energy to escape, because, you lose too much weight, you might get through there, but you get out on the other side and you take like 2 steps and you pass out because you haven't been eating. So it was a fine line to walk. He would arrange some law books in the bed and cover them with a blanket to look like somebody was laying in case somebody did walk by the cell, which they did do, and reported that he was there for a bed check, which he wasn't. It was books and nobody really paid attention. So he would crawl his way through the ducts, and just like in a Hollywood prison escape film, and drop down out of the air vents into the jailer's apartments on the other side, which were vacant. Nobody was in them. Bundy then changed into some civilian clothes that he found, and he just walked out. Guys, he walked out of jail. He literally crawled through an air vent, dropped down, changed clothes, and walked out into the night and disappeared. So in this photo, I won't need to pause it really, but you can see the amount of weight. Like, you can see he's looking really kind of haggard and slim in this photo. This was before the escape through the ceiling, but you can see like the collarbones are kind of sticking out. Just not looking great. And I guess nobody thought really anything of it. So Bundy himself even claims that the escape was sloppy and was sheer luck. And reading his account on how long it took him to acquire a stolen car and how someone helped him once the stolen vehicle broke down in the snow, luck may be the only way to explain such fortuitous circumstances. So literally, it took him an hour, I believe. He talks about it. It took him an hour to find a car that was open because he was just going down the street and trying door handles of cars, to which he could have been arrested and caught for any of those things because he was breaking into people's cars, basically. He was trying to find a car that he could get into. So, hey, Cody. So it took him an hour, and he said the streets were pretty empty because it was New Year's. So most people were inside having parties and stuff like that. Most people were not out on the street. So it took him an hour to find a car. When he did find the car, he drove it, he was driving towards Denver, and he broke down in the snow, or he got stuck in the snow, and somebody actually pulled over to the side of the road to help him out of the snow and didn't think anything of it. They just thought he was a motorist, got stuck in some bad weather, didn't have the tires to get where he was going. And, he helped this guy out thinking he was doing a good thing, had no idea it was Ted Bundy. So, there's that. So Bundy did make his way to the airport and almost narrowly missed a flight to Chicago, only making it onto the plane by the skin of his teeth. He was in Chicago long before the jail in Colorado Springs even noticed he escaped. So he was 3 or 4 states over before they even knew he was gone, before they even went in the morning to go check his bunk and found that it was just books under the blankets. The lack of extra security at the airport and how Bundy had been able to board a plane so quickly underscored the change in times from then to now. In this photo, you can see that is Bundy's cell at the Garfield County Jail. Those are the books that he piled up under the blanket. The blanket is on the floor, as you guys can see there. The hole in the ceiling, you can see how small that hole was that he stood on the bunk and climbed up through. It was about 20 to 24 inches in diameter to squeeze your way into that, to get into those ducts to escape. So, was Ted Bundy Harry Houdini reincarnated? I don't know. I'm not saying that he wasn't, but I would like to start that rumor officially here on this show. Hashtag Bundini. Bundini, you guys. I will make Bundini shirts if you want them. Just throwing that out there. So that is the cell after his escape. They were like, and of course then he had been gone for hours. By this point, by the time they found the cell empty, he was gone for hours and they had no idea of the direction he went at all. So the way he got to so this is a big thing of like how things have changed from then to now. There'd be no way that Bundy would have not been apprehended the moment he tried to board a plane without any kind of identification. But this was, of course, long before 9/11, before the era of terrorism that we find ourselves in today. And simply by placing down cash, he was able to buy a ticket that night and get on a plane. And be several states away by the time they noticed he was gone. They had no idea he was missing. So he was placed on the FBI's most wanted list because this man, they were pretty sure killed multiple people, and now they had no idea where he was. So this is a copy of the official FBI wanted poster that they put out and circulated while looking for him. So from Chicago, Bundy traveled to Ann Arbor, Michigan. He claimed he had been in a state of mania at this time, from the time he had escaped until he got to Michigan, and spent time in a bar there on January 2nd, blending in with others who were watching the Rose Bowl. He almost got his ass kicked, by the way, because apparently he was watching his old alma mater, the University of Washington, play against Michigan and in the Rose Bowl, and he almost got his ass kicked in that bar by a whole bunch of Michigan fans because obviously he was cheering for the wrong team. So wouldn't that have been ironic and funny? He just got his ass beat in a bar and just didn't get to kill anybody and got like arrested. Weird. So looking around the tavern and seeing the cheerful people and the couple standing close together, Bundy said he felt the energy and the high drive from his manic state slowly kind of start to slip away, leaving him in a familiar low state, which is the, depressive state that you see on the other side of bipolar disorder. He would be diagnosed with bipolar disorder a few years later. So he kind of would drop down into that depressive low state after he peaked. And 5 days later, he would steal a car while he was in Michigan and he would drive to Atlanta. He would abandon the car in an urban neighborhood with the keys in it and boarded a bus to Tallahassee, Florida. The bus station at Tallahassee was flooded with students returning to Florida State University for the spring semester. And this was just the environment that Bundy darkly thrived in. If you'll remember correctly, when he was on the loose in Washington, his preferred hunting grounds were what? College campuses, full of young ladies that were just his victim type. So he was on the hunt again, clearly. He rented a room near the campus under the alias Chris Hagen. He didn't have much money left in the reserve that he had accumulated while in jail after having to spend a good portion of it on plane tickets and bus tickets and travel and board. So he'd resolved to find legitimate employment and just lay low under the radar. He didn't want to get, set off any alarm bells, didn't want to set off anybody's, radar for any reason. And which is wise. He had made his way onto the FBI's 10 most wanted list. So maybe don't draw attention to yourself, Ted. But making his way onto the FBI's most wanted list really didn't matter to Ted. He had always considered the organization overrated. So, because he knows everything. Hello, everybody who's joining. I'll take a brief break right there just to say hello to people who have walked in. Hello, Oracles. Hello, Javi. Hello, Cody. I got you already. Hi, Dontex. Hi, Cassie. Hi, Lab. Hi. I'm just going to give everybody their individual highs right now. Hello to Veronica. I saw you in there earlier. Max, I saw you. Electric Pagan, I saw you. think I got everybody. If there's anybody I missed, it's not intentional. I'm trying to remember. Oh, hi, Glam. I saw you. That's your. I was like, there's somebody else. Please share. Yes, you are worth 2 hellos, Cody. Yes, this is very true. Hi, Tamara. So of course, Bundy wanted to lay low. He knew he could likely remain free in Florida for as long as he wanted under an alias, so long as he didn't run afoul of the police. So, just don't draw attention to yourself, and he could probably stay as free as he wanted because, again, guys, literally nobody knew where he was, and nobody knew where he was gone. Hi, DJ. Sorry, I didn't see you in there earlier. Hello. Side note. See, I did forget somebody. It's not personal. But the idea of getting the luck that seemed to follow him on the heels of his escape seemed to evaporate suddenly when his sole job application, one on a construction site, asked him to provide identification, which of course he did not have. So, hi Ethereal Sisters. Hi PETA. Hi Sean. Hi Nikos. I think I got everybody. Y'all are making me feel real special by hanging out in here and giving me a really big audience. I'm going to get tongue-tied. Hi, Mike. Hi, Mike B. So, problematic. Applied for a job. Went to get legitimate employment. The employer was like, I'm impressed by your resume, mysterious stranger. May I see some identification? And he went, no, you may not. And he left. I imagine that's how it went. Very boo hiss kind of moment sort of thing, I guess. So the idea of remaining law-abiding and legitimate immediately then fell to the wayside, and he would revert to his old habits of shoplifting and stealing credit cards from wallets left in idle shopping carts. So unfortunately, back to the criminal stuff, because going on the straight and narrow did not work out, I guess. So Bundy had been incarcerated for his prior crimes in Utah and Colorado for a period of about 18 months. And in that time, while Bundy did seem to thrive in a prison environment, he had not been able to indulge in the dark impulses that had driven him to take at least one woman a month for years before his capture. But now he was free and he could indulge. So you can imagine somebody like Ted Bundy, who has these dark impulses that he later then talked about after his capture, when he has these dark thoughts and you're unable to act on any of that in jail, right? So you're not around your preferred victim type. You're not in a place where you can act on these thoughts, these ideas, these urges. So the moment you get out, what's the first thing you're going to do? Now, to be fair, I guess he did try for 5 minutes to be normal before immediately falling back into serial killer island. So fell off the wagon and fell off of it real hard. So on January 15th, 1978, in the early hours of the morning, Bundy entered the Chi Omega sorority house on the University of Florida campus through a back door that had a broken, faulty lock. In his hand was a large piece of oak firewood. Women slept serenely in the house, completely unaware that the specter of death had just walked into their midst, unaware that 2 of them would not live to see the morning light. At around 2:45 a.m., Bundy came upon 21-year-old Margaret Bowman, she's the one on the right in the photo, and bludgeoned her to death with a piece of firewood as she slept. He garroted her with a piece of nylon stockings and then strangled her. He would then enter the bedroom of 20-year-old Lisa Levy, the photo on the left, still at the manic height of rage. He beat her unconscious and strangled her. He would savagely bite deeply into her left buttock and bite off one of her nipples while he sexually assaulted her with a hairspray bottle. The bloodlust had yet to be satiated, though, and in an adjoining bedroom, he would encounter Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler. He would strike Kleiner and break her jaw savagely, also deeply lacerating her shoulder. She recalls that she tried to talk or scream, but couldn't. Quote, "My jaw was broken in 3 places," she said later. Her jaw had actually been broken so severely that one of the security patrols that came to the house following the attack recalled that, quote, her jaw was actually hanging off on one side. Only one hinge was still attached. She was totally incoherent and in shock. Yikes. Can you, okay, so you hit somebody so hard, you literally knocked their jaw off almost. Like, that is a level of rage that until I went into this case, I was unfamiliar with. I was like, you did, and this is not with a knife, this is not cutting, this is not stabbing, this is not chopping, this is just brutal, brute force. She said in a later interview, Kathleen Kleiner did survive the attack. She said that she looked on the wall and she said, all I know was I got hit. And I just saw this shape in our doorway and something hit me. She goes, and I tried to scream and I couldn't scream. She said, and I looked and all I saw was just blood on the wall. And there was like blood all over my brand new comforter. And she was just, there was blood everywhere. So, and then he attacked her first, and then he turned around and attacked her roommate, Karen Chandler. So Karen Chandler would be attacked also. She suffered a concussion, a crushed finger, and a broken jaw with several teeth knocked out. She was on the floor and bleeding badly from head injuries when she had been discovered in the bedroom. Both Kleiner and Chandler would survive the attack, which they attributed to a car's headlights actually coming up the drive outside, shining into the bedroom. The attacker, sure he had been seen, immediately fled. Authorities would determine later that the frenzy of the attacks had taken less than 15 minutes and had happened within earshot of 30 potential witnesses who heard nothing. Perhaps driven by the interruption of his attack and his pent-up rage that remained unspent, caused him to seek out another victim after fleeing the Chi Omega house. 8 blocks away from the sorority house, Bundy would break into the basement apartment of FSU student Cheryl Thomas. She's the one in the center photo on the bottom, I believe. And he would beat her, dislocating her shoulder and fracturing her jaw and skull in 5 places. She would also survive, but was left with permanent deafness and damage to her equilibrium that ended her dance career. Bundy had been wearing a makeshift mask made from nylon stockings when he attacked Thomas. It was found discarded on her bed along with a semen stain. 2 hairs that were, quote, similar to Bundy's in class and characteristic were found on the mask as well. Neighbors of Thomas had been alerted to her distress and the attack, and Thomas credited their trying to contact her as the only reason she survived. Debbie Ciccarelli was Thomas's neighbor at the house where Bundy had slipped in that morning. She said, quote, I woke up to this loud pounding. It was just a real loud banging sound. We could hear Cheryl moaning, whimpering. I called Cheryl. We could hear the phone ringing because the wall was so thin, but she wasn't answering her phone, unquote. Again, Bundy fled once he realized that his presence might have been noticed by potential witnesses, and he vanished just as abruptly as he had appeared, leaving an unhinged and frenzied swath of death and destruction in his wake on that quiet January morning. But it would not be the last time that women in Florida would be terrorized by Ted Bundy. So we will take a breather there. I saw there were a couple questions. Yes, he did have weapons on him, but they were weapons of opportunity. I saw Sabra, you asked if he had weapons. He used a piece of wood at each of these locations, a piece of firewood that he took in with him as just that he found outside of the home, outside of the sorority house. He did not, seems like, premeditate to bring a weapon with him. He just happened to pick up a weapon of opportunity, as was unfortunately the hairspray bottle that he used to assault Lisa Levy was just found in the room. Everything was just kind of like in a frenzy and just grabbed at the moment, and it was very sloppy. Like, it was a very frenzied attack. There was a lot of evidence left behind where he hadn't really done that in any of his previous attacks. He'd been very careful to dispose and dump the bodies away from where they were kidnapped. He didn't really leave any evidence. He discarded their clothing. Any weapons he did use, he would actually discard on his drive back from dumping their body. And he'd been very, very careful in his previous murders to not leave any evidence really behind. But perhaps a side effect of being locked up for so long and unable to act on these impulses, he just was like a dog off of a chain and lost it and just went banana boat time. It was like he was like a kid in a candy store. Just supermarket sweep, up and down the aisles, brutal. That's the only way I could describe it when I kind of like got into it. So I was like, this is, this is a thing. And he like just lost his mind. Just lost it. Not that there was much of sanity there to begin with, you guys, but yeah, fucking wild banana times. So unfortunately, these weren't the last women in Florida that would be terrorized by Ted Bundy. On February 8th, he would drive east to Jacksonville in a stolen FSU van. In a parking lot, he would encounter 14-year-old Leslie Parmenter, the daughter of Jacksonville Police Department's chief of detectives. Bold, Ted. What are we doing? He would produce false identification in the form of a badge that he had countless times before to win a victim's unwavering trust. This time, he claimed he was Richard Burton, fire department. Okay, hold up. I need a drink for this. I need a drink for this, and I kind of wish I had alcohol because, excuse me, Richard Burton Fire Department? Tedward, I can't. But if somebody flashed you a badge that literally said Richard Burton Fire Department, would you just, I'd be like, is this a joke? No, sir. No. Like, no, absolutely not. I'm sorry. Like, the fact that first of all, you picked an actor's name, because, that's not suspicious as hell. That doesn't sound fake as hell, too. And fire department. Which fire department, Ted? Which one? I don't think actual badges, somebody can correct me on this, just say fire department or police department or police cop on it. I'm like, this looks like something you bought at a costume store, fucko. No. Get away from me. So he tried to grab Leslie Parmenter, but he quickly retreated when her older brother showed up and challenged him. So it didn't go well. So he was not able to nab the person he wanted, but that same afternoon, unsatisfied and stymied in his attempt to kidnap Parmenter, he backtracked to Lake City, Florida, which was a small, sorry, Cody, I'm picking on your serial killer, Tedward. So he backtracked to Lake City, Florida, which is a small town, real small town. They, in Florida, they left their doors unlocked, that sort of small town. Everybody knows each other. It would be where he would encounter his last victim, 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. On the 9th of February in the morning, Kimberly Leach was asked to return to her homeroom by her teacher in order to retrieve a forgotten purse. She never returned to class after that. In fact, the young girl was never seen alive again. So that is the day after. So we'll recap a photo a little bit. Well, so that's the day after at the Chi Omega house. Pretty famous photo, was used in a lot of newspapers. This was taken the day after the carnage happened, which a lot of the girls obviously did not return to the sorority house. A lot of them did not return to campus after this because, again, they didn't know where this guy was. He just disappeared into the night. They didn't know if he would be back or not. Obviously, he'd broken in once before. What's going to stop him from breaking in a second time? Nothing. Literally nothing. So most of the girls packed up and left campus at that point. And, Florida was on pretty high alert looking for this guy who had committed these crimes. And again, nobody knows had really any idea what he looked like, who this was. There were no clues left behind other than some bite marks and, some semen stains, which in the 70s, they didn't do any DNA testing at that time. So again, big question marks, guys. So unfortunately, this is Kimberly here. She was never seen alive again after that afternoon. 7 weeks later, her mummified remains were found near a pig farrowing shed near Suwannee State Park. She had been brutally raped and killed. Underwear found discarded near her body showed traces of semen. Yuck. This suggested that she had been stripped, then oddly redressed before being stripped again, which is really strange. It was then perhaps that Bundy began to suspect that his time as a free man was running short. He had fallen behind in his rent and didn't have enough cash to cover his room and board, so he fled Tallahassee in a stolen car on February 12th, driving west across the Panhandle. No doubt his plan had been to start over after escaping authorities, as he had already done in Utah, so the plan was probably to get where he was going, maybe cross state lines, lay low, wait till the heat was off, and then just take another fake identity, steal some more credit cards, and just continue with the sham until he could, keep going, I suppose. But he could just get to another college town too, maybe a state over, maybe go back to Georgia and start his cycle of hunting all over again. But this time, Bundy's luck ran out. So his incredible luck that had been following him since his escape twice in Colorado, it finally ran out on him in Florida, outside of Pensacola. So 3 days after fleeing, I'm sorry, I gotta stop for a second because Cody's like, the guy that guy escaped twice. I'm saying Bundini, you guys, just saying. Ted Bundy, Houdini, Bundini. I mean, is he reincarnated? Maybe. I don't know. We're starting that rumor. You guys. That rumor starts here. You heard it here first. So 3 days after fleeing, he was pulled over by Pensacola police officer David Lee near the Alabama state line. So clearly he was intending to cross another state line, lay low for a little bit, and then start his hunting up again when, the police, he figured, stopped looking for him. But a wants and warrants check that David Lee ran on the vehicle showed that the Beetle he was driving had been stolen. Because Ted never owned a car. He did own a car, but they took his car away. So when Lee told Bundy he was under arrest, Bundy kicked Lee's legs out from under him and took off running. Lee fired 2 warning shots before giving chase. He would tackle Bundy, both men struggling over Lee's gun before Bundy was finally subdued and handcuffed. Inside the stolen car were 3 sets of IDs belonging to female FSU students, 21 stolen credit cards, and a stolen television set. Of all things. And a partridge in a pear tree. Cody's just reading everybody the riot act right now. I love that. This is the second time. So he's not wrong, though. This is the second time that Ted Bundy was caught because of what? A traffic stop. Not because somebody recognized him as Ted Bundy. Not because somebody went, that looks a lot like the guy on the FBI 10 Most Wanted poster. Nope. He was like, I ran the plates. That car's stolen. I pulled it over. The end. Signed, sealed, delivered. So a TV set, really? Tedward Bundy. I can't with you right now. I shan't, and I won't. So Bundy often recounted that in times of his heights of mania, when he would go on these bipolar, binges, he would go on shoplifting binges for things he just wanted. He would shoplift a lot. It was one of the things he did in his, I guess, when he wasn't murdering people. Murder, shoplifting, the usual things. Just serial killer things, you guys. Yeah, I know. Can you imagine, that guy was like, I caught who? Oh, fuck, really? We'll get to that. It's, but apparently murder and being on the run had not curtailed these shoplifting habits. Perhaps it was an outlet to get a thrill or an adrenaline high before he could kill somebody else again. But the true cause is really unknown for the shoplifting. Pimp My Ride. He was the first to have a TV in his car. Not wrong. Not wrong. Following a trend. That's what's happening. That's a secret Bundy would take to the grave with undoubtedly countless others. Also found in the car were a pair of dark-rimmed non-prescription glasses and a pair of plaid pants. This was later identified as the disguise of Richard Burton Fire Department in Jacksonville. Plaid pants. Way to stand out. So Officer David Lee was unaware that he had just arrested one of the FBI's 10 most wanted criminals that morning. And as you can see in the photo on the right there, there's a mark on Bundy's face, and that is where he struggled with Lee, and he was struck in the face with Lee's gun. So as Lee was transporting the suspect to jail, Lee would hear Bundy say, quote, "I wish you had killed me," unquote. So he luck ran out, got snagged. Plaid, what a sexy beast. Unless you're feeling amorous. Well, then good night. So Bundy's trial for the Chi Omega murders would begin on June 25th, 1979 in Miami, Florida. The trial was televised. Wow, that's a word. Yeah, he got pistol whipped 100%. Like, they fought over the gun, and Officer Lee did not hesitate cracking him across the face with the butt of that pistol. So the trial was televised nationally in the U.S. and was covered by over 250 reporters from all over the world. Despite having 5 court-appointed attorneys, Bundy represented himself and would provide his own defense. Polly Nelson, one of Bundy's attorneys, later wrote, quote, "Ted was facing murder charges with a possible death sentence, and all that mattered to him, apparently, was that he be in charge," unquote. Typical narcissistic behavior. Wow, the narcissist says what? Oh, weird. Prior to the trial, a plea bargain had been negotiated with the prosecution in which Bundy would plead guilty to killing Lisa Levy, Kimberly Leach, and Margaret Bowman in exchange for a 75-year prison sentence. Bundy saw the deal as a means of avoiding the death penalty and also a tactical move, as he could enter the plea, and then years later, when evidence had either disintegrated or disappeared altogether and witnesses either died, retracted their testimony, he could file a motion and secure an acquittal. However, at the last minute, Bundy refused the deal. Mike Minerva, one of Bundy's attorneys, said, quote, "It made him realize he was going to have to stand up in front of the whole world and say he was guilty. He just couldn't do it," unquote. So he had this whole strategy behind possibly taking the plea deal and then went, wait, I'm going to have to tell people I did what? I have to admit to shit? No, I'm not doing that. So during the trial, Chi Omega sorority member Connie Hastings placed Bundy near the Chi Omega house that evening, and Nita Neary testified to seeing Bundy leaving the sorority house holding the oak murder weapon. That is Kathy Kleiner on the stand. She also testified against him as well. Forensic odontologist Richard Souveron and Lowell Levine matched castings of Bundy's teeth to the bite wounds that were left on Lisa Levy's left buttock. As a matter of fact, this was one of the first cases that dental impressions and bite mark evidence were submitted as such huge pieces of scientific forensic evidence. Again, this was the 70s, and about as forensic as you got were fingerprints or blood typing. There was no DNA, there was none of that. So the fact that they used the bite mark evidence so prominently was like one of the first times this actually happened. And of course, other trials would continue to do that later on. They said that the sheriff, when they pulled Bundy out of jail to go get the bite marks done, they didn't tell him where he was going. So they pulled him out of the prison cell, and the sheriff said, Ted, you're coming with me. And he said at first he got kind of defensive and was like, well, where are we going? Where are we going? And he's like, I think he thought I was taking him out of jail and he was not going to come back from this ride. But he's like, we get him in the car, and we take him to this place, and he walks up the stairs, and we open the door, and he is kind of cocky, I guess, all the way up until this point, until he sees the dental chair and the 2 guys standing on either side of it. And then the sheriff said, Bundy lost his shit. Lost it. Started freaking out, was like, you can't do this to me without a warrant. You can't and started just flipping out. And they were like, we have a warrant. We can either do this the easy way or the hard way. How do you want to do this, Ted? And then basically once it was clear that he was not going to get out of that room without giving his bite impression, they said immediately calmed down and immediately did a personality 180, because they were like, we can just cuff you and just see those irons on you and we can just do this. And he got real quiet. He walked over, he sat in the dental chair and said, you're not going to need all that stuff. I'm not a violent guy. And immediately submitted to the bite impression. They said it was a really weird, such a quick change of going from being adamant and being like, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. You can't make me do this, to the switch flipped. And it was I think once he realized he wasn't going to get out of there without doing it, it was like, oh, okay, well, this is happening. So I might as well, the mask goes back up. You can't see. So that was the bite wound there. This is a photo of him getting the bite impression done after the whole fiasco, the whole tantrum, I guess. Yeah, Jaconis, I see that every day at work. It's funny because once a convict realizes, it's like, you know what, I could fight this and then they're just going to I could make this real difficult on myself, but this is still happening whether I want it to or not. So calmed down immediately, went from wet cat, to okay, I guess you can take my teeth. Of course, dental impressions and bite mark evidence has kind of been debunked a little bit in the recent years. They said it's not really a 100% accurate science, and it's not. There have been people that have been wrongly convicted on bite mark evidence because it is very subjective, depending on the dentist that is doing the impressions, depending on how it's lined up. But that's a photo of Dr. Lowell Levine. He's a very famous forensic dentist. He has done hundreds of other cases with bite impressions. That is, so those are Bundy's teeth, the bite mark, and then the bite impression, which they then, of course, line up to go see the bite impression, the teeth line up with the marks. Yeah. I wouldn't stick my fingers in there. No, I wouldn't have either. I'd have been afraid he was going to bite me. Honestly. Ugh, no. So it didn't take long for, once the jury sees these photos and this kind of evidence, it took them less than 7 hours to convict Bundy on July 24th, 1979 for the murders of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, as well as 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder for the assaults on Kathy Kleiner, Karen Chandler, and Cheryl Thomas, and 2 counts of burglary for breaking into the Chi Omega sorority house and breaking into Cheryl Thomas's apartment. So they were pretty much, the jury was not left with too many questions after the bite mark evidence, and that's really what nailed Bundy up until that point, because other than that, it was eyewitness testimony, which of course can always be refuted by good defense attorneys on the stand. But once they had this scientific evidence, well, the jury was a little less willing to be charmed by Bundy. So, yeah. So then on January 7th, 1980, there was a second trial for Kimberly Leach's murder. So his trial in Orlando began for the kidnapping and murder of Kimberly Leach. And unlike the trial in 79, which in this trial here, he only wanted to represent himself again, which he did do in the 79 trial with the Chi Omega murders. He represented himself, and, well, we can see how that went. He was very charming to the jury up until, points, and it just kind of, the wheels went off. One of his attorneys even said, she's like, I really think he was crazy in that he didn't really seem to realize and understand how serious this was. It was almost like a dog and pony show for him, where it was like he was just posing for the jury and he would laugh with them and joke with them and didn't seem to take this seriously, almost like he was playing a character in a TV show. So obviously representing himself did not go well in 79. He was convicted. So in 1980 for the Kimberly Leach trial, he allowed his attorneys to represent him, and they tried to secure the insanity plea, which was possibly the only defense with how much evidence the state had against Bundy for this one. During the trial, Bundy displayed fits of anger, was slouched in his chair, and his normal collegial look was sometimes replaced with a haunting glare. He was found guilty after less than 8 hours of deliberation, primarily due to testimony of an eyewitness who saw Bundy leading Kimberly from the schoolyard to his stolen van, as well as the unique clothing fibers in evidence that were found in Bundy's van and on Kimberly's body that matched fibers from Bundy's jacket that he wore when he was arrested. Yeah, usually representing yourself does not go well. During sentencing, Bundy called Carol Boone, who had attended all of his, if you remember previously, she had been kind of an on-again, off-again presence in Bundy's life. He had met her back in Washington when he worked at that criminal group. He met her, and she believed him and basically just stood by him and kind of became his girlfriend in a weird twist, because she was super supportive of him and completely believed he was innocent, completely believed he was being framed by the state. So during sentencing, Bundy called Carol Boone to the stand as a character witness in order to testify for him, and then asked her to marry him in a weird circus twist. I can't with this. He took advantage of an obscure Florida law that stated a marriage declaration in court made in front of a judge constituted a legal marriage. Because, why wouldn't we have a 3-ring circus in the middle of this murder trial? Because that seems totally sane, right? Ted is team too much. A hashtag team too much, Ted. I can't with this right now. So you ask your character witness who's up there to try to defend you from getting the death sentence, the electric chair, you ask her to marry you. Cool beans, dude. That seems normal and sane that someone would do that. So while Bundy was incarcerated, so they were married at this point, and she stood by him this whole time. They later somehow were able to have sex in prison, even though conjugal visits for death row inmates were verboten and not allowed. So no physical contact was supposed to be happening, and that's exactly what happened. So she later gave birth to Bundy's daughter, Rosa Bundy. Boom. And boom goes the dynamite. Well, she had been convinced of his innocence. Carol later divorced Bundy upon realizing that he was actually guilty of the horrific crimes that he was accused and charged of. It said that she was so shaken by his final confessions of guilt before his execution that she even refused a final phone call from him before he was put to death. She refused to let Rose have any further contact with her father before his death. And in an even bigger twist, his daughter is still living today. She's 37, 38 years old in relative obscurity. Carol Boone did change her name and tried her best to live off the radar as well, until her death from septicemia at age 70, which was reported in January 2018. So Carol did pass away. That is Rose Bundy there. With her dad, but nobody really knows what she looks like. There are no current photos of her. She lives off the grid pretty much, and kudos to her. I can't imagine growing up with that kind of stigma around yourself and people wanting to ask you questions about your dad all the fucking time, even though you didn't really know him. That is real unfortunate. She did not ask for that life. But back to the second death trial. In no surprise to anyone except for maybe Ted himself, he was convicted of another death sentence. He kept his back to the judge the entire time that the verdict was read, in a almost toddler way of being mad about being found guilty. It's almost like he took it personally when people didn't believe him. He was just so, and I guess in the first trial, he was absolutely flummoxed when they came back with a guilty verdict. He was absolutely shooketh like to the core. And hold on one second, because we're going to have here TED Talk in a minute. TED Talks. Oh, God. I hope that's not the origin of TED Talks. I really hope it's not. Whew, that just gave me the giblies. Anyways, so in the first trial, apparently when they came through with the guilty verdict, he was just absolutely floored, shocked, stunned, shook. Because I think in his mind, he really thought he could talk himself out of anything. Out of a murder trial, out of a death sentence, out of everything. He was such a narcissist and in such a state of delusion that he literally thought he would just smile at the jury and be charming and they would just let him leave. And I'm like, Ted, that's not how, did anyone tell him that's not how this works? That's not how any of this works at all. So he was so shocked and so hurt, I guess, by the first verdict that in the second one, he just refused to even look at anybody. He just kept his back to the judge the entire time that the verdict was being read. And it was announced. And when the sentencing was announced, he, in an uncharacteristic outburst, Ted shouted, quote, "Tell the jury they were wrong." So you might have a question that you might want to ask me, loyal murder puppets. Well, so why two death sentence trials? Why two separate death sentence trials? One for Kimberly Leach and one for the Chi Omega. Well, simple. The prosecutor in the Kimberly Leach said, George Daigle said that despite criticism for wasting taxpayer money on a second death trial, securing a second death sentence would ensure that at least one of those sentences would be carried out. There would be less of a chance for appeal and receiving mercy for his heinous crimes. So more knots in the noose make it harder to wriggle out of, I guess. What was that? A whack job with a narcissistic bipolar split personality. Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. Ted is disturbed. A little on the loose side. So his insistent proclamation of innocence ended shortly after the conclusion of the Leach trial, because up until then, he was vociferous in his own innocence. He claimed that he was being framed. He claimed that it wasn't him, that they had nothing against him, that they had no evidence, blah, 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 blah. He just crowed and crowed and crowed about how much he didn't do it. How he didn't do it. I didn't do it. It wasn't me. It was, as we call it, y'all, the Shaggy defense. I saw you in the sorority house. Wasn't me. Saw you hit her with a log. Wasn't me. Like, pretty much that was it. Like, and he just swore up and down it wasn't him. Well, that charade dropped very quickly after the Leach trial in 80. Bundy agreed to do several interviews with Stephen Michaud and Hugh Ainsworth, which are if you haven't watched them, the Confessions, the Ted Bundy tapes on Netflix, which is the basis for the movie with, Zac Efron, incredibly, extremely evil, extremely wicked, shockingly evil, and vile. He had mom issues for sure. Big time. So the interviews he did with Stephen Michaud and Hugh Ainsworth were basically to write a book. He was wanting to write a book about his experiences and his innocence, but he dodged and kind of tried to talk around things, and they noticed that he was not exactly 100% forthcoming in a lot of, he was just tap dancing around the subject. So Stephen Michaud had this idea of like, well, what if I get him to talk in the third person about the crimes? Because he was not wanting to talk about details. He was just talking about his backstory and his origin story, and just, like a narcissist, wanted to talk about himself. So the whole idea was to reveal the crimes and the details and everything and confess to these things. So Ted still didn't really want to do that, kind of still holding on to that little nugget of innocence that he thought he had, I guess. So Michaud got him to speak in the third person about a lot of these, and maybe that was his way of kind of confessing in a roundabout way. So it was in these interviews that Bundy began to reveal certain details and his thought processes behind the murders. Cue quote. that was a really bad cue. Cue quote. It's in here somewhere. I'm going to wait because it's going to start as soon as I stop talking. Now. Damn it. Cue quote? Come on, cue quote. Where did it start? Because I have it on here. My timing is off. I talk too long, and I'm like, throw my timing off. Come on, Ted. Can't leave me hanging like this. Hanging. Huh. Because Florida still allows hanging. An electric chair. Oh, that was funny. I literally put the quote in here, you guys. Hold on a second. Oh, you know what? I think did I take that quote out? Okay, or the quote's not in there. That's weird. Hold on. Because it's kind of an important quote. So this is what we're going to do. Pardonnez-moi for a second. Yeah, Ted's like, nope, we're not going to talk about that today. Nope. Like, okay, well, I guess we're not going to talk about that, Ted. All right, fine, fair. Yes, Utah does still allow a firing squad. As a matter of fact, serial killer Gary Gilmore requested to be killed by firing squad in, I want to say it was 90 something. I'd have to double check on that, but I remember the date. But hold on. Okay. I'm going to see if this will let me for 2 seconds. I'm going to remove this and I'm going to stop that. And then we're going to do this. Okay. Here's the quote that I wanted to put in here.
Well, Bill, I could corroborate something on virtually every one of these. I mean, I'm almost without a doubt on every one of these, one way or another. I mean, that's I don't think anybody doubts that I've done some bad things. The question is what, of course, and how, and maybe most importantly, why. I'm not, make no bones about it. I am looking for an opportunity to tell the story as best I can in a way that makes sense to me, in a way that'll help not just you or the families, but that's very important, but also to help my own family. You see, I saw the look in my stepson's eyes yesterday after he had been told for the first time that, you see, he's always believed in his heart. I mean, he always wanted to believe that I had never done anything like this. As hard as it may be for you to believe that, there are people who do believe that. Like, then there are people close to me who believe that.
Yeah, so do you like my names for things? Bundy done things. Bundy done stuff, you guys. Bundy done bad things. He done bad things. All right, so we're going to go back to this. Hold on. Okay, so apparently I opened the video file, because I was like, thought I lost my mind for a second. I opened the file while you guys were listening, and I had apparently taken that quote out. Don't really know why, but there you go. So this was part of the confession process. They basically got him to do it in the third person. And even then he was still kind of reticent to give out all the details. He wasn't wanting to tip his hand entirely, you guys. He confirmed a thought that his girlfriend, Elizabeth Kendall, had originally hypothesized back in her 1975 interview with Detective Jerry Thompson that he was a thief, and he had actually shoplifted every item of value that he owned. He was quoted as saying, quote, "The big payoff for me was actually possessing whatever it was I had stolen. I really enjoyed having something that I wanted gone out and taken," unquote. This provided the building block for his explanation for the murders as well. He said that sexual assault fulfilled his need to totally possess his victims. It was originally not about murder. However, like potato chips, once he started, he couldn't seem to stop. Quote, "The ultimate possession," he had stated, "was in fact the taking of a life, and then the physical possession of the remains," unquote. Michaud and Ainsworth were not the only ones that Bundy confided in. He also spoke with Special Agent William Hagmaier of the FBI Behavioral Analysis Institute. Hagmaier noted a, quote, "deep, almost mystical satisfaction that Bundy had taken in murder in general." Quote, he said that after a while, murder was not just a crime of lust or violence. He continued, stating Bundy's own words, "It becomes possession. They are a part of you. The victim becomes a part of you, and you two are forever one." Yeesh. "And the grounds where you kill them or leave them become sacred to you, and you will always be drawn back to them," Bundy told Hagmaier, presumably somewhat laughingly that in his early years he was an amateur impulsive killer, and that he was in his prime in 1974 around the time of Linda Healy's murder. This was the first reference he had made to any murders occurring before 1974, but of course was a little elusive with the details and did not share names, locations, any of that, but just kind of alluded to their maybe victims before Linda Ann Healy, which is his first known victim. Bundy's old habits of attempting escape, did not quell with time. In 1984, he was caught with 2 hacksaw blades in his cell. Upon further investigation of his cell, it was discovered that a steel bar in one of the cell's windows had been sawed through and then put back into place using a homemade soap-based adhesive to avoid suspicion. Perhaps sensing that the day of his death sentence was to be carried out was drawing near with every passing day, Bundy was beginning to grow desperate. Attempts at escape were becoming futile, as the guards had grown wise to his antics and started probably shaking down his cell every chance they got to find, I don't know, fucking chicken bones in the shape of a MacGyver lock. I don't know, dude. Like, he was creative. It was shady and creative. So he was attempting to grow desperate. So what was his next logical step to prolong his usefulness to the police department? Well, that was exactly it. Prolong his usefulness, provide being useful to the police department. In October of 1984, Bundy contacted Robert Keppel and offered to share his expertise into the mind of a serial killer. Police were on the hunt for the Green River Killer in Washington, and Bundy was sure that he was able to find, that he was able to find the Riverman, which is what they were calling him at the time. This nickname would eventually become the title of Keppel's book, The Riverman, Ted Bundy and I Hunt for the Green River Killer, which is now available on Amazon, on Audible, if you want to listen to it. It's very good. Keppel later noted in a later interview that Bundy's habit of speaking about the crimes of the Green River Killer in the third person helped their investigative team tremendously, as the average person typically can't get into the mind of a serial killer themselves, but I guess it helps to have one on staff. He also noted the things that Bundy claimed that the Riverman was doing must have also been subtle confessions to the things he himself had done while committing his own crimes. He suggested that the killer was most likely revisiting the dump sites to engage in sexual intercourse with the bodies, and told them that they should find a fresh grave, stake it out, and wait for the killer's return. Bundy's claims were accurate. However, it would take another 17 years before the Green River Killer would be brought to justice. Intrigued? Well, you should be. But that is another story for another day, loyal watchers and my spooky fam. Bundy would not live long enough to see his efforts come to fruition, though he really, really tried. He pulled out all the stops. In early 1986, his execution date for the Chi Omega case was set for March 4th of that year, and it was quickly rescheduled. And in April, the new date was announced as July 2nd. So Bundy, ever opportunistic, took the chance for one final desperate attempt to prolong his life. He confessed to Hagmaier and Nelson what they believed was a full range of his acts, including details of what he had done to some of the victims after their deaths. He'd confessed that he visited dump sites several times to perform sexual acts on the bodies until full decomposition made him stop. That was apparently the only thing that made you stop, Ted? Okay. He said in Utah he'd applied makeup to Melissa Smith's face after death. Ted Bundy, makeup artist? Do you think his makeup skills were on point? Like, do you think he was good at contour? Yes, queen. Get it. He even washed Laura Amy's hair. He decapitated 12 of his victims with a hacksaw and kept a few in his apartment before disposing of them on Taylor Mountain. The last-ditch effort to prove that he was still full of useful information proved futile, however. But fate intervened in the form of one more time less than 15 hours before his scheduled execution. So the snatched for the gods in more ways than one. So his confession tapes were then played because his mother was always, this is his mother and his stepfather. They were always in his corner, and his confession tapes were played at the end, right before his execution, to his parents. And that was her reaction. So I guess realize that your son actually did the things that, he was accused of. Well, that could not have been easy on her for sure. So basically he still had people up in his corner until the end, almost until the very, very end. So I can't imagine that would have been easy for his parents to hear the fact that, because you never want to believe the worst of your own child. But you know, the proof was in the pudding, unfortunately, and the confessions were done in Ted's own words. So it wasn't like, oh, you guys coerced him to say that, or you guys, you know, this was from a third party. Like, nope, we recorded him saying these things, and he confessed with gusto to these things. So that's a slide of her receiving a phone call from him right before he was executed. Ooh, let me fix my shirt. So the 11th Court of Appeals stated that they were reviewing the Chi Omega case for multiple technicalities, including Bundy's competency to stand trial, as well as erroneous instruction from the judge during the death penalty phase, which required the jury to break a 6-6 tie between life imprisonment and the death penalty. To this date, this has never been solved. While this would have been enough to keep Bundy on death row until he most likely died from natural causes, like most people, remember, he had another execution sentence to carry out, which was given as a way that he couldn't weasel his way out of it. So a new execution date for the Leach case was set for November 18th, 1986, but once again, the 11th Circuit Court issued a stay of execution the day before. This lasted until 1988, when the 11th Circuit ruled against Bundy's appeal. In December of 88, a firm execution date was set at January 24th, 1989. Once all of his appeals had fallen through, Bundy agreed to openly speak with investigators. He finally confessed that he'd been guilty of all 8 of the Washington and Oregon murders, and even described 3 previously unknown victims in Washington and 2 in Oregon. He refused to identify them. However, it remains unknown whether Bundy would have known the identities of any of his victims had he not actually been caught. He claims to have had a 5th corpse, the corpse of Donna Manson, on Taylor Mountain, but had incinerated her head in Elizabeth Kendall's fireplace. He stated, quote, "Of all the things I did to her, this is probably the one she's least likely to forgive me for. Poor Liz. Poor Liz! Poor woman's head you burned in a fucking fireplace, you monster." Good gravy. Good. Unable to forgive me for... You burned her head like it was a Duraflame. No, Tedward. You're canceled. You're canceled. Bundy also described in graphic detail the way he had lured Georgianne Hawkins to his car before rendering her unconscious with the use of a crowbar. He then drove her to Issaquah before strangling her to death and spending the night with her corpse. Yeesh. He also admitted that for the first time he had revisited the spot where he had abducted the girl the next morning. Amidst an active crime scene investigation, he found one of Hawkins' earrings and one of her shoes, which he gathered up and departed with, completely unnoticed by police. How? How? This man just strolled in and picked up evidence and walked the fuck out. I cannot. It's just Tedward. I don't Were these the Keystone Cops in Utah? Is that what happened here? I don't understand. This was daylight. This was daylight. Under God's flashlight. Okay. It was as these confessions were going on that Bundy got another idea. So he claimed that then, again, to kind of prolong this, keep going, he claimed that there were undiscovered remains buried in Colorado, but refused to elaborate any further. This tactic was called Ted's Bones for Time scheme, and it actually backfired on him by making the authorities long to see his death sentence carried out on time. In cases where he had given a bit more information, investigations did turn up nothing, proving that, yes, this just was another manipulative tactic. There was only one option left: executive clemency. Diana Weiner, a Florida attorney and last love interest for Bundy, had the balls, the massive cojones to ask the families of victims in Colorado and Utah to petition to postpone the death sentence in order to hear more details about undiscovered victims. Every single family refused to play his game, citing his attempts at negotiation, using his victims' bodies as despicable. And the fact that he had another love interest at the end, I can't with these women. Is the bar set that low, truly? Truly. On the eve of his execution, Bundy talked about suicide. He threatened to open up an artery so he would bleed out before they got the chance to execute him. He did not want to give them the satisfaction of watching him die. These threats were quelled, and Bundy was executed in the electric chair at 7:16 a.m. on January 24th, 1989. His final words were reported to be, quote, "I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends," unquote. As the execution was carried out, there were hundreds of people across the street, like you see these people right here in this crowd with their homemade t-shirts. There was a whole bunch of people. There was like hundreds of people outside the prison when he was executed. And people started, as soon as they got the signal, somebody walked out, they saw the lights dim inside the prison, as the electric chair, of course, was being used. And somebody came out and waved a handkerchief to signify that the execution, the sentence had been carried out. And the moment it was carried out, people that had gathered there were singing, dancing, cheering, and even setting off fireworks to celebrate his death. Several people even chased gleefully after the hearse that carried Bundy's lifeless body away from the prison. His body was cremated in Gainesville, and his ashes were scattered in the Cascade Range of Washington State, where he had, quote, "spent the best times of my life." And thus ends the saga of Ted Bundy. We have a couple more notes, postscript, P.S. Interesting question, Dontex. We're going to get into that in a second, but so that's a photo of the Tampa Tribune the day that he was executed. Actually, the day after he was executed, that's the 25th. This is a photo, I believe, there's the hearse, the white hearse that is leaving the prison. And because you guys know I love a good ghost story, and let's be honest, the paranormal and true crime combination teaming up make almost as amazing a combination as peanut butter and chocolate. There are, of course, a few supernatural tales attached to the life and death of Ted Bundy. The death chamber where he was executed in Florida is supposedly home to Bundy's ghost. In 2001, a guard from Florida State Prison, where Bundy spent his final days, told a reporter that shortly after Bundy was put to death, several guards saw his ghost casually sitting on the electric chair. The guard described Bundy's expression as, quote, "a knowing smile," as if he knew something important about the afterlife that they didn't. If a guard tried to approach him, he'd disappear. The man telling the story said that there were so many sightings at one point that the warden couldn't find anyone willing to enter the execution chamber alone. Bundy also showed up around his holding cell on death row. To some guards, he would say, "Well, I beat all of you, didn't I?" Presumably, he meant he'd beaten them to the other side. Or maybe in his own way of saying, "I beat you all," like, "I beat you." Like, "I beat you, I got out of it." Sensory depth. Cody, let's go. Let's go to the execution chamber and find out if he's hanging out there. Another location where he is supposedly seen is the Chi Omega sorority house, which is still standing on the FSU campus. It is still the original building that the murders were committed in. So supposedly people have seen a shadowy figure walking around the halls of the sorority house at night, doors closed, that sort of thing. They have a feeling of being watched. They have a feeling of that, like somebody's walking, they hear footsteps, sort of that sort of thing. So finally, and that's not the last location, y'all. Finally, this one's a little bit closer and probably easier to get into than an active death chamber, which I'm pretty sure they still execute people in Florida at that prison, so we might not be able to investigate it. But there's an abandoned home in Bountiful, Utah, which is reportedly haunted by the ghost of the infamous lady killer himself, a house in which the locals claim he murdered victim Deborah Kent. Both the Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures crew and the Haunted Side's own Patrick McQuarrie said they captured a lot of eerie occurrences on the property, even the name Ted coming through clear as day through a spirit box. Like they asked, who's here? And through the spirit box, Ted. Boom. Like, that's pretty definitive. So, yep, who's up for finding a serial killer spirit? So what is then... I mean, I'm down. I'm always down. But so what is the legacy then of Ted Bundy? What are we left? We're left with more questions, honestly, than answers, because I'm fairly sure it's an abandoned home in Bountiful, Utah, Cody. We got to figure out which house it's in. I think Patrick has been there, so we can ask him if he remembers where it's at. And it's in Utah, so that is not far. It is not far. It's much closer than Florida. And the fact that he died like with a smirk on his face, people did say that they were like, that's a little unnerving. So that's a photo of him out, obviously, after he was executed and died with a smile on his face. So clearly not much of a conscience. The sorority, I don't know. They probably have a lot of people ask, and they probably have a lot of people showing up to take pictures at that place. So I don't 100% know. But so what is the legacy that Bundy leaves behind? Well, there's a lot of questions. There were a lot of things that he took to the grave, no doubt. There are estimates that there's 36 known victims. Those estimates can be as high as the triple digits because nobody really knows how many people he killed before he started killing in 74. How many of were never found? Were there more? He himself alluded to the fact that the victims could have been in the hundreds. Whether that was true or not, or whether that was the ramblings of a narcissist, well, I guess we'll never really know that 100% for sure. But all we really do know is that Bundy definitely was not the typical serial killer. He really he was and he wasn't. In a way that he wasn't what people expected. He was not the lurking monster. He was not the demon in the shadows that everyone expected. He, for all intents and purposes on the outside, looked like the boy next door. He looked like your neighbor. He looked like anyone you could easily run into on the street and wave at. Not that wave, because that wave's creepy, but a regular wave. But inside, there was definitely something wrong. But we'll let this interpretation of one of Ted's most famous quotes kind of show what was on the inside that was lurking behind this smile. Monster inside, normal outside. Keep that in mind. I know, right? It's a creepy face. That is what I think people look at me when they wave at me in Messenger. That is what they look like, 100%. Don't wave at me in Messenger, because that's the face I see. Yeah, it's like, ooh, no. But yeah, let's, face doesn't always match the, what's going on in here. That was the scary part about him. I know I put this audio in here, you guys. I know I did.
You learn what you need to kill and take care of the details. It's like changing a tire. The first time you're careful. By the 13th time, you can't remember where you left your luggage.
Oh, Ted. Oh, Tedward. And so that is the conclusion of the saga of Theodore Robert Bundy, you guys. And that was the promised surprise guest audio that I told you guys about. Any idea who wants to take a guess at who that was? That was a quote that's actually my favorite Bundy quote, but I could not find an audio of it, so I had somebody record it for me. I know there's somebody in the chat who knows who it is. Yes, he was very, yeah. Beware of your surroundings. You never know who's watching. And they might look normal, and they might seem normal, and then they want to put your head on a stick. No, that's a good guess, Sabra. No, that's a good guess. Any other guesses as to who my guest audio playing guest Ted Bundy? No, but that's a good guess as well. No, it's not Crow. Although I'm going to have Crow do one. I can play it again. You guys, hold on. Let me open Audacity and I will play it again. No, I've asked Jason. Jason will do one on a future episode. I'm actually going to have Jason play somebody else. Wait 1 second. Actually, you know what? I can't open it on Audacity. I have to open it. Yeah, it was Cody. Yep. You guys got it. It was Cody. Cody played Ted Bundy. A cop played Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy played a cop. I don't like this version of Inception, you guys. Yes, it was Cody. So congrats, Cody. Thank you very much. Thank you for playing Ted Bundy for the quote for me, because that was the quote I really, really wanted, and I could not find it anywhere. I could not find that quote any place. And I was like, can you please record this for me? He's your favorite serial killer. Please, please, please. Yes. It was an awesome job. Thank you so much, Cody. Was amazing. Look for more of those guest appearances in the future by other people. Just because there are a few more serial killers that we're going to cover that don't have audio recorded for them or don't have, sound clips necessarily. Some of them are old enough where they don't have any kind of sounds attached to them. So, it's y'all suck. It's like, y'all are terrible. Everybody but me. Were there any other questions? Before I let you guys go, we'll open it up to a Q&A. If anyone has any questions about Bundy, about the Bundy case. I lived and breathed that case for longer than I care to count, you guys. So this was a deep dive, and it almost cost me my sanity. So I can't believe I deleted that one quote in the middle. It was so dumb. I was like, really? Like, what? I thought I left it in there. I'm stupid. Thanks, Cody. Some of these may end up having to be two-parters, just depending on the volume of the case and how many murders there are, because I like to cover everything very thoroughly. So we may have the same thing happen with Gacy, just because I like to get into the nitty-gritty, and sometimes you can't do that in a single hour. So, well, if you guys are out and don't have any more questions, thank you for being here. Thank you for hanging out with me. While I'm sure there's other things you could be doing and other lives you could be watching, so I really appreciate you watching me. Also, before you go, we're going to go ahead and show that real quick. So don't forget, we are still running the fundraiser to get New Reality and the Haunted Side to the Viper Room. If you have not contributed, please, please do. I appreciate you guys so much for doing that. Everybody who already has donated, thank you a ton. Every little bit helps. If you don't want to donate to the GoFundMe, you can either donate to the New Realities PayPal, which is on their page as well. Cody, if you want to throw the link in there, if you have it handy, you are more than welcome to throw the link in, or onto the Haunted Side one as well. So either of one of their PayPals work also. All of that money is getting pooled to go to the Viper Room. This is a unprecedented place that we have access to and have a possibility to get into, because usually like these are like big like things like BuzzFeed Unsolved and like Ghost Adventures get to go places like this. So the fact that we are getting an opportunity to go to a place like this is off the charts, and it's really haunted, and I really want them to go. So yes. So please donate. Thank you to those who have already donated. Hi Frank. Yes, Team Rewatch. Please rewatch as many times as you want. And I will see you guys tomorrow for episode 18 of the regular Dead Hours, which is going to be Paranormal 101. Again, class is back in session. This time we are talking about portals and vortexes. So, which may or may not include a very famous one in Bermuda. Spoiler alert, it does. Plus a bunch of other ones. So we'll get into the mystery and mysterious disappearances behind some of the vile vortexes. Don't forget to smash that like button, like and subscribe, share this video, all of that good stuff. Thank you. Also, side note, before you guys go, there is now Murder Corner merch on the Dead Hours store on Teespring. Link is in the video description. Please go look at it. It's kind of cute. I'm kind of proud of it. I'm not gonna lie. So you guys can jump over to either Haunted Side. I believe there might still be live. I'm not 100% sure, at Cabin in the Sky. Go throw them some cash for the Viper Room. Go throw New Reality some cash for Viper Room, and just throw them some cash because they just got 5,000 subscribers. So fucking congrats. I'm gonna get there one of these days. All right. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great evening, and we will be back tomorrow and next week, and basically until you're tired of hearing me talk. Which I get tired of hearing me talk. It's fair. All right. Thank you, guys. Stay spooky. Have a great night.